Guys, this is a momentous Sunday because we're finishing a journey that we began 3 years ago. And for the last 3 summers, we've been working our way through the book of Genesis. And we're finally here. We're at chapter 50, the last moments, the last part of this story. And over this whole last summer, we've been looking at the life of Joseph, and we're kind of at the finale point of really his life and of this entire Joseph story. And there's all this tension, like all the tension that began in chapter 37 when he was favored by his dad, hated by his brothers sold him, which kicked off this whole series of unfortunate events that finally led him to the place of great favor in Egypt. We're seeing some of that tension actually come back in. What we're seeing is tension that Joseph thought was resolved actually not being resolved, but coming to a point of completion today as his story really ends. Now, to bring you up to speed, where we're at right now is Joseph has already revealed himself to his brothers. He's like, guys, it's me, I'm Joseph. And over the next 17 years, he's brought his whole family into the land of Egypt. He's provided for them well. They've got the best of the land. They're just favored by Joseph and really favored by all the Egyptians in a large part and favored by God. Now, Jacob, their father, finally dies. And one of his final requests was, boys, when I die, I want you to take me back and bury me in the land of Canaan. Bury me back in the land and actually in the cave where my fathers are buried. And he makes him promise to do this. And so that's exactly what happened. Jacob dies and the sons come and they begin this whole process in Egypt of embalming him. That takes quite a long time. And then Joseph and the brothers go back to Canaan, but it's not just them. There's a whole large entourage of the Egyptians that come to honor Joseph's dad. They get to this place in Canaan, and they have this celebration of this life, but this serious time of mourning, so much so that the inhabitants of the surrounding villages actually change the name of that town and call it essentially the Egyptians were mourning. Like the mourning, the outcry, and the honoring of Jacob's life was so large that a whole city was renamed. I'm kind of like, gosh, Lord, I hope my life is that impactful. Maybe I die and somebody renames a city, you know? But we see this, and I bring this up because I mean, how many of you have been at a funeral? A moment where it's just like there's so much emotional energy in the room, in the environment. You're thinking about what was, what will be now that they're gone. And this is the headspace of the brothers. This is the headspace of Joseph as the story continues. We pick up Genesis chapter 50, verse 14. And it says this, after burying Jacob, Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had accompanied him to his father's burial. But now that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers became fearful. Now Joseph will show his anger and pay us back for all the wrong we did to him, they said. Now this is interesting. Just side note here. The brothers expected Joseph to treat them the way that they would have treated Joseph if they were in his shoes. Okay, think about it like this. Oftentimes when we have expectations on people, and we're like, oh, they're going to do this. Really what we're doing is projecting the way we would act if we were in their shoes. And we see this, and it gives us a little bit of a picture into the brothers' hearts. Like, you can almost picture Judah or Reuben going, hey, if I was Joseph, this is the opportunity. This is the moment that I would take to finally get back at the brothers because dad's out of the picture. And so we see them having this fear of like, what's Joseph going to do to us? Verse 16. So they sent this message to Joseph. Before your father died, he instructed us to say to you, please forgive your brother. Now, just hold on a second. Did Jacob really have this conversation with the brothers? Not that we're told. This is a flat out lie. This is absolute rubbish. They're making up a story. And I mean, talk about kind of hard-heartedness here. Essentially what they're saying is, hey, on dad's deathbed, he told us something really important that you need to know, and he told us to tell you to forgive us for all these things. I mean, they're just putting words in his mouth, but they're doing it to save their own skin. So they sent this message to Joseph. Before your father died, he instructed us to say to you, please forgive your brothers for the great wrong that they did to you, for their sin in treating you so cruelly. So we, the servants of the God of your father, beg you to forgive our sin. Now, there's a couple things going on here. Notice, number one, that the brothers didn't come to Joseph personally. They sent a messenger. They got one of the Egyptian servants. Come here. We need you to go talk to our brother. You go talk to your brother. He's your brother. No, I need you to do it. You go talk to him and you give him this message. Now, what they were doing was creating relational distance here. And it's interesting because, remember, Joseph, 17 years ago in chapter 45, had already forgiven them, restored the relationship with them, cared for them, provided for them, gave no indication whatsoever that he would ever take revenge on them. But it's given us a picture into their heart that maybe they received the benefits, the physical benefits of Joseph's forgiveness, but they actually hadn't had that relationship completely restored. In their heart of hearts, they hadn't really dealt with the guilt that they had felt from how they had treated Joseph or receiving the forgiveness that he had extended to them. And so the brothers come and they grab a messenger. And I can only imagine how awkward that moment would have been. This Egyptian messenger comes into Joseph. Joseph, well, your brothers sent me to tell you that they said before your daddy died that he told them to tell you to forgive them for all the evil that they had done for his sake. I mean, it feels like junior high, like, hey, handing this note on behalf of my friend, check yes or no. You just like, and it's interesting to me because here's Joseph, and I can only imagine, we'll see this momentarily, how he responds. Like, he's touched deeply and emotionally by this. He's restored relationship. At this point, he's going, hey, I've got my brothers back. I've got my dad back. Now he's passed, but I've got my family back. I've missed them for so long. It's been rocky. It's been rough. How many of y'all know family's difficult? But I've got them back. And yet here's the brothers. And instead of doing what Matthew 18 tells us to do, hey, if you have conflicts with someone, just go to them. They go about it in a roundabout way. It reminds me actually of the way that Jacob, their father, dealt with Esau, if you remember that story. Instead of confronting Esau and apologizing himself, he manipulates him. He sends entourage, messengers ahead of him to try to smooth the way. And the brothers are doing the exact same thing. I can only imagine Joseph thinking, why didn't you just come talk to me yourselves? Like, why'd you have to get them? They're not even family. Why'd you get them involved in this? And what they're trying to do is really quell any thoughts that Joseph may have of retribution. But the problem here is this: Joseph didn't have any thoughts of retribution. He didn't have any ill will towards his brother whatsoever. And when you think about all that the brothers had done to him, wanting to kill him, hatred to the point of murder, selling him as a slave, which kicked off all these unfortunate events in Joseph's life. Joseph, dealing with all of that, had come to a place of forgiving his brothers, and there was no bitterness left. And because he had forgiven, because there was no bitterness left, he was actually free. And there's such a juxtaposition here. Joseph was free from the offense that his brothers had caused. But on the flip side of that, his brothers were still in bondage. They had this undealt with guilt still deep inside of them. Joseph didn't know about it. He thought they were good. He's like, it's been 17 years. We're restored. We're good. But there's this lingering, undealt with guilt deep inside of them where they haven't fully received the forgiveness that Joseph has offered to them. Look how Joseph responds in verse 17. When Joseph received the message, he broke down and wept. He's like heartbroken. I mean, he's an emotional guy. Can we all agree with that? But this is hitting hard. He's like, I thought I had my family back, and now it feels like I don't. I thought we had dealt with all this and restored all this, and now they're bringing it back up. And he weeps. He's like, how could you think this about me? It's interesting. Joseph, experienced a famine, and the brothers experienced a famine. Now, the famine is long past. But it's interesting because they experienced a famine, but it was almost like two different famines. The brothers had been in a famine for food. Joseph had been in a famine for family. The brothers were starving for stuff. Joseph was starving for them. Like, he's wanting this restored relationship, but the brothers just aren't quite getting it. It continues on, verse 18. Then his brothers came and threw themselves down before Joseph. Look, we are your slaves, they said. Now, it's interesting here because this actually marks the final fulfillment of the dream that Joseph had as that young 17-year-old man. Here are the brothers, for the very last time, throwing themselves down, bowing down in front of Joseph. But I don't think they actually recognized the magnitude of that moment because they were so consumed with this unresolved guilt. There's this blinding effect that happened to them because they just hadn't actually dealt with the guilt that was inside of them. Joseph had forgiven them decades ago. They just hadn't received it. And this reminds me of a parable that Jesus told. If you don't mind us jumping to another story, jumping quite a bit further along in Scripture, all the way to the Gospels, to Luke chapter 15, Jesus told this story, and he was telling actually a lot of stories about lost things being found, but he tells a story that's become known as the prodigal son. You guys know the story. There was two sons. The younger son didn't like his dad, didn't like his older brother, came to his dad and said, hey, I really want your money, but the problem is you're still alive. I wish you were dead so I could have your money. So could we work something out where you don't have to die, but I still get your money? And the dad, in this amazing moment, actually agrees to it, gives the son half of his inheritance. You guys know the story. The son goes away, squanders the money, gets to a point where he's dead broke, has no friends, and he's starving to death. And Scripture tells us that he comes to his senses. And this is what he says, verse 18 of Luke chapter 15. And I think you're going to see the connection here between the way the brothers were interacting with Joseph and the way that the son was interacting with the father in this parable that Jesus spoke. In verse 18, he says, this son that came to his senses, I will go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. Sound familiar? He's essentially going, look, because of what I've done, I know that you could never treat me as part of your family anymore. I know you could never call me a son. Like, I've ruined that, but can I at least be a slave? And here's Joseph's brothers, and they're going, hey, I know because of what we've done, there's no way that we could be family anymore. We're not brothers. We would never assume that, but can you just make us slaves? Now, look what happens in the parable that Jesus told as it goes on. It says, so he returned home to his father. And I imagine that journey of one where he's practicing his speech over and over again. Like he's starving, right? He hasn't had a good meal in probably weeks. His stomach is churning. But over and over again, he's just saying this speech. I've sinned against, heaven and you. I'm not worthy to be called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. I've sinned against heaven and you. Please take me on as a hired servant. Like he's just repeating this. And we come to verse 20. So we returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. Verse 21, his son said to him, Father, now this is so interesting. Like, here's the dad, and the dad's just excited to have his boy home. He's like, yeah, you're an idiot, but I love you. And I'm really glad that you're home. And he's just hugging him and kissing him. He's just so excited to have his son home. But the son has a mission. Remember, he's been practicing a speech. And I almost picture him going like, okay, dad, just stop. I have something to say. And he launches into the speech. Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, verse 21, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. And then his speech stops. And the father does something. The next verse, it says the father doesn't look to the son, but speaks to a servant and says, get him a coat, get him some shoes, put a ring on his finger. Now, this is interesting. Did you notice there's a part of his speech that he missed? He didn't finish it. He said, I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. And the part that he should have said is, so make me your slave or a hired servant. And it's as if the father let him get through his speech to the point where he said, I am no longer being worthy of your son. And he's like, what did you say? I'm no longer worthy of being called. Excuse me? And he's like, enough of this. The son thought that he was commenting on his own sinfulness. In reality, he was commenting on the character of his father. The son thought that he was casting judgment upon himself. In reality, he was casting judgment upon the father. He's saying, I've sinned so much. That's what he thought he was saying. In reality, what he was saying is, your love isn't great enough to cover over my sin. Your mercy isn't great enough. You aren't merciful enough to forgive me. And the dad's like, want to bet? Doesn't let him finish the speech and doesn't speak to him. He's like, my son can't hear this in words. He needs to see it in action. So he says, I don't know how he called servants back then, if he had a bell or whatever, but he gets a servant and says, get a robe, get the ring, put the shoes on his feet. And it's just amazing to me because sometimes we'll come to God and we'll be like, okay, I've received Christ. But then something happens. Maybe you sin. You fall back into a pattern of sin. You're like, oh, I did it again. Or maybe a memory comes up from the past. And you go, there's no way that God could actually forgive me for that. And we begin to, in our own minds, cast judgment upon ourselves, but in reality, we're casting judgment upon God. And we're saying, God, what you did on the cross wasn't enough to cover that sin. God, your grace and mercy doesn't extend that far. You're not really as good and loving as you claim to be. I'm actually better at sinning than you are at forgiving. And the Father's like, oh, you want to bet? Enough of that. I'm not letting you finish that speech. I'll show you. And so we come back to Joseph and his brothers, and they're essentially doing the same thing. They're casting judgment, which they think upon themselves, but really what they're doing is going, Joseph, you're not as good as the guy as we thought you once were. Like, there's no way that your forgiveness would extend so far after all that we've done to you. Jesus made a statement in John 15, if we could jump back to the New Testament for a moment. And he said, greater love has no man than this, and he laid down his life for his friends or for his brothers. And what Jesus was saying in preparation for what he was about to do on the cross, he was saying, hey, the greatest love that anyone could ever show. And by greatest love, he's saying the greatest quality and quantity of love that can be expressed to another person is when you actually step into their place and lay down your life for them. You take what they were going to get. You take what they deserved so they don't get it. And he's saying essentially to his disciples, boys, I'm about to do this. And when I give my life for you on the cross, I want you to remember the absolute value, quantity, quality that I've demonstrated to you. Like, I cannot say in any louder or more significant way the depths of my love and how far I'm willing to go to forgive you and restore relationship. And that's exactly what Jesus Christ did for you and me on the cross. And it's almost like Joseph is like a prototype of Christ. He's going, guys, it's been 17 years of me showing you, of me being in prison, even though you guys were the ones that deserved to be in prison, of me going through this hardship, even though you were the evil ones. And you still don't get it? Look how Joseph responds. As we look at his response in verse 19, back to the story, I want to just kind of point out that we're going to see kind of his process of forgiveness, and we're actually going to learn a couple keys to forgiveness. I mean, how many of you have had someone in your life that you've just found very difficult to forgive? Maybe what they did was large or small, but the emotional impact, the maybe financial impact, the trauma that it's caused has been significant. And you find yourself like, okay, I forgave him, and then you wake up 2 weeks later and you're like, it doesn't feel like I forgave him. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, forgiveness is not an occasional act, it's a constant attitude. And man, I found that to be true. There's some keys that we're going to see from Joseph of how to actually step more fully into forgiveness. Look what he does. Verse 19. He wept while they weren't there. Now they're coming before him. They're saying, just make us your slaves. Here's his reply, verse 19. But Joseph replied, don't be afraid of me. Am I God that I can punish you? You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. No, don't be afraid. I will continue to take care of you and your children. So he reassured them by speaking kindly to them. The first thing we see Joseph doing is this. He recognized that there's only one God and he wasn't him. And this is important. If we're really going to step more fully into forgiveness, which we're commanded to do, we need to recognize that there's only one God and we're not it. Joseph was like, guys, retribution is not on my job description. It's not a privilege or a responsibility that God has placed in my hands. I got the power to do it. I don't have the authority from God to do it. That's his job, not mine. There is a God, I'm not him. Max Lucado had this little thing he said, I love it so much. He said, blessed is the man who recognizes there is only one God and stops applying for the position. This is what Joseph did. He's like, vengeance isn't mine, it's God's. It reminds me of King David as he's being chased around, already anointed as the next king of Israel. He's being chased around by evil King Saul. He has opportunity after opportunity to kill Saul, but he doesn't. He says, this is not my job. There is a God. I am not him. Vengeance is God's, not mine. And when we step into forgiveness, essentially what we're doing is going, look, what you did to me, I'm not going to make you pay for. God might. but I'm not going to do that because there is a God and I'm not him. The second thing we see Joseph doing in this passage is really increasing his appreciation and the view that he has of the providence of God. Another way to say that is the sovereignty of God. What's the providence of God? It means that God is always in control. He's always guiding and caring for everything in the world to fulfill his good plan. Look what he says, verse 20. You, brothers, intended to harm me, but God intended something too. But God intended to take your intentions and use it for my good to bring about a great salvation. Verse 20 is one of the great statements of faith in the Bible. And what's amazing about it, it's actually the grounds upon which Joseph forgives his brothers. Joseph is so confident in the providence of God that he was able to let them off the hook. He was confident that his life was not in the hands of the people who had done him wrong. His life was in God's hands. And there's a couple of things going on here. Number one, we see Joseph came to grips with the reality of evil, okay? He did not diminish what his brothers did. Look at verse 20 again. He says, you intended to harm me. You can almost picture him looking down from his throne as, his brothers are sprawled on the ground, faces down, make us your slaves. And he's saying, yeah, I know what you did, and what you did, you meant it. You did it on purpose, and you meant it for evil. He doesn't diminish the evil that they did. Forgiveness is not saying, oh, it's all right, you didn't mean it. That's not what forgiveness is. Forgiveness means, yeah, you're a terrible person for doing that. I can't believe what you just did. This was evil. You meant it when you hurt me and when you said these things. And so we see Joseph here not playing God, but he's also not playing dumb. He's looking at the facts, and he's not denying reality. But we see this confidence in the providence of God. He said, you intended evil, but God intended good. It's such a picture of what Christ did for us on the cross, right? Like at the cross, we see man at his worst, but God at his best. It's like Joseph could see, hey, my brothers are operating on this natural level, that the level that we can only see with our eyes. They intended for evil. He says there's another level that we can't see with our natural eyes. That's the God level, the providence level, the sovereignty level. And God's using what's happening on the natural level to bring about his good plan and purpose. Man at his worst, God at his best. That's what the cross is all about. Joseph had actually said something very similar to his brothers 17 years previous. And I love the way he stated it there as well. Genesis 45:5 says this, now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves. This was the first time Joseph revealed himself. It's me, guys. Don't be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve my life. What a powerful statement. You sold me, but God sent me. And if you're going to operate in great forgiveness, you got to come to a point where you say, yeah, you sold me, but God in his providence sent me. You intended to hurt me. I'm not going to diminish it. That was a terrible thing you did. But I have such a confidence in the power, the control, and the goodness of God that I know that God had already considered what you would do to me, worked it into his plan to bring about my good and his glory. A high view of God, a high view of the sovereignty of God is the foundation for true forgiveness. And if your view of God is too small, that's probably why you're struggling to forgive. Because you're so focused on what they did. You're looking at the natural. You're looking at the hatred of the brothers, the selling into slavery, and you're forgetting the supernatural God that you serve. You intended evil, God intended good. You sold me, but God brought me. Right? And when we shift our eyes from the circumstance, some of y'all are letting the circumstances of what people did to you actually change your identity and how you act. Think about it. Christ bought you on the cross. It says that we were purchased with a price, now glorify God with our bodies. You were purchased, you belong to him, which means he's the only one who has the right to speak identity into you. What's your identity? No longer sinner, saint, a son or daughter of God. That's who you are in Christ. Beloved of God. But you act like someone who's not the moment you choose not to forgive, because what you've done is you've given more power to what's been done to you than what's been done for you by Jesus Christ. Is this making sense? And you're letting someone smear your identity, your God-given, God-imaged identity, because you're more focused on the natural than the supernatural, because your view of God is too small, because you're not looking up, you're looking down, and you're not seeing the providence of God at work or trusting the providence of God at work in your life. But we see Joseph doing not only those things, but actually a third thing. And what we see Joseph doing is he turned his forgiveness into action. Look at verse 21. No, don't be afraid, Joseph said. I will continue to take care of you and your children. So he reassured them by speaking kindly to them. I love this. Joseph didn't forgive the way that we typically forgive. You know, the way we forgive is we'll be like, oh yeah, I forgive Daniel for doing this, but I'm never talking to him again. I forgive him for what he said, but man, if he ever asks me for anything, he better watch it. Joseph said, I forgive you. And it's not just going to be words. The father in that story that Jesus said, told, said, I am restoring relationship with you, but it's not just words. Get the ring, get the coat, get the shoes. Joseph said, it's not just words. I've forgiven you, and I'm going to continue to take care of you. You're going to see my forgiveness in action by the things that I'm going to do for you. When you have someone you need to forgive, if there's any sort of creative idea you can come up with for something good you can do for them or to them, you got to do it. It's really interesting as you look at Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. It's called the Sermon on the Plain in Luke's account of it. But specifically look at Luke's account of it. And he gets to a section where he's speaking about how we should respond to those who have done us harm. And there's all these action words, and I'd encourage you, go read the chapter, highlight and circle all the actions words. He'll say things like forgive, turn the other cheek, pray for, bless, do good to. He's saying, hey, if you're going to forgive, it can't just be words. Here's a list of creative things that you can do to put your forgiveness into action. And if we're going to be like Joseph, if we're going to be like Jesus, we need to have that high view of the sovereignty of God, but we also need to take our forgiveness and put it into works. And say, you know what? I'm going to make this right. As far as it is, it's possible with me. I'm going to live at peace with everyone. I'm going to turn my forgiveness into action and actually do something on behalf of them. Now, some of you are like, well, that's a nice story, Ryan, but I'm just not sure I'm there yet. And you think of people in your life and past who have wronged you. You think of some of the things that you've been through, and you think to yourself, I'm not even sure these people deserve to be forgiven. Ever thought like that? I have. And the question I think I would need to pose to you, and I know it's a question I've posed to myself, is this: do you deserve to be forgiven? And the clear answer is no, you don't. But you have been. That's the message of the cross. That's what the gospel is. You don't deserve forgiveness. Jesus came and demonstrated in both quantity and quality the greatest demonstration of love and forgiveness possible by dying for you on the cross, by taking your place. And he forgave you not because you deserved it, but because he loved you. If you're asking the question, do they deserve it, you're asking the wrong question. And you'll never operate in forgiveness. If you start with, did I deserve what God did for me? That's a great starting point. And you'll actually be empowered to forgive in a way that you've never been empowered before. But this takes faith, you guys. It really does. Like so many things, maybe all things in the Christian walk, it takes faith to forgive someone. Because in forgiveness, you're saying, I'm letting them off the hook. I'm not going to make them pay what they deserve to pay. And in essence, when you forgive someone, in a very real sense, you're absorbing that debt. And you're saying, I'm going to pay for this one. Maybe actually pay for it financially, sometimes relationally, oftentimes emotionally. You're saying, I'm going to absorb this. This is what Jesus did for us. He became sin who knew no sin. He absorbed our sin so that we might become the righteousness of God in him. How many of y'all know this is not easy? But it's what actually frees us. I just want you to go back as we close, just to that moment in the story. Go back in your mind's eye to that moment when Joseph's brothers are laying down on the ground saying, make us slaves, when Joseph first hears the message. Think about the emotion in that room. Think about how free Joseph was from the past and how in bondage the brothers still were. It's a choice that's laid before us. We can stay in bondage or become free. The choice is really clear. The path is really clear. We need to choose to forgive. We need to choose to receive the forgiveness of Christ, and we need to move forward. Amen? All right, let's pray. Jesus, we love you. We're so grateful for your word. Help it to change us this week. Father, I'm asking that all of us would step towards forgiveness this week, and we begin to see the powerful changes that that's going to make. And I pray it now in Jesus' name. Amen.